All right, very good. So, speaking of how happy life was before we had Apple products, let's go back to about 600 BC. One of the things that Jack was asking about a little bit ago, and I think that some of you may have noticed, is we're kind of doing a bounce through time. So we're not taking this in a linear thing. So when we go ahead to Nehemiah, or we bounce back to Ezra, we're actually changing the time frame we're talking to, because the entire story of Ezra took place before the entire story of Nehemiah. And so some of you who were asking, that might answer the question you had, Jack, is why we're getting different people showing up at different times. That would be why. Turn this off. So, all right. So what we're going to look at tonight is we're going to look at Ezra chapter 3 and chapter 4. And the reason we're going back to Ezra chapter 3 and chapter 4 is because we need to, when they were rebuilding Jerusalem around this time, they were working on it in phases. So what they decided is we're going to rebuild the inner part. That's what Ezra did. And then later when Nehemiah showed up, they built the outside part. And that was kind of the plan. So, and that's the way that they were kind of progressing and working on it. So, with that in mind, we're going to take a look at this tonight. We'll see how far we get. If we get farther, maybe we'll move on. But what we're going to do is we're going to sort of see the plan that they had in rebuilding the temple, because you remember that's what they were up to. So we're going to look at the plan that they had to help that to happen. And then we're going to look at how immediately, and I mean immediately upon saying, here's what we're going to do, everybody gets angry, because that doesn't happen at all today ever, you know. It's called sarcasm for those of you who aren't keeping up. That's how that works. So that's what we're going to see. So Jack, does that answer your timeline question you were asking earlier? Part of it? Okay. So that's why we're going to see the name of some kings that were in the past, and some of them are in the future, and that's why some of the names we're going to be running over here are going to be a little different. So we're starting with Ezra chapter 3, and what they're getting ready to work on is the temple. So let's look at this. So, and I'm reading, for those of you who may not be following along with me, this is the New Living Translation, which may be a little different from what some of you have. In early autumn, when the Israelites had settled their towns, all the people assembled in Jerusalem with a unified purpose. All right, what do you think? Let's do this. True or false on that statement? I'll read it again. In early autumn, when the Israelites had settled in their towns, all the people assembled in Jerusalem with a unified purpose. True or false? False. Why? That's exactly right. That's 100% correct. Whenever you say a bunch of people had a unified purpose, if there were more than two, they were not unified. Okay, somebody had a different idea about how things go. And so basically what happened is Ezra put out the call, we're going to start building. So all the people who wanted to build showed up. And all the people who didn't. So there was unified purpose amongst who was there, but not unified purpose amongst everybody. But here's the interesting thing that we're going to find, okay? So who was doing the work here? Verse 2. Then Jeshua, son of Jehozadak, joined his fellow priests, and Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, I'm 0 for 4 on that sentence, joined with his family in rebuilding the altar of the God of Israel. Only interesting thing here is you had two people named specifically. You have Jehozadak, whom I have never heard of, and Zerubbabel, who I know a little bit about. Jehozadak was the priest. I mean, you can't join your fellow priest unless you're a priest, okay? So I'm assuming he was the high priest. And Zerubbabel, we talked about him the first week. He was the puppet king set up by the Persians. He was a descendant of King David, so all the Israelites liked him. And he was willing to kind of play ball with the Persians, so the Persians liked him. He was honestly the great peacekeeper, the great... I'm going to say compromise, but I don't mean that he was doing bad things. He just was able to work between these two very powerful forces and able to make it function. So what you have is you have the religious leader and the political leader working together. That's what you have in this situation. Believe it or not, that's the kind of thing we used to do all the time. I know today, like, that's against the law. I said that as a joke, and it's actually not even a joke. But yeah, that just doesn't happen anymore. Now, in places like St. Mary's, it happens. I can tell you city council and the mayor's office and a lot of the city leaders call me all the time for stuff, for getting my help with it, which I want them to. That's a very good thing. But I'm on a first-name basis with just about all those guys down there. And I call them when I want stuff, and they call me when they want stuff. Normally, they call me when they want public support, and I call them when I need permission for something. That's how it works. But situation we make work, and we get a lot of stuff done around here because of that. A lot of it's probably not out in the open, but a lot of who's scratching who's back at the time. So, but these two guys showed up very publicly because you had Jehozadak leading the priests, you had Zerubbabel leading the population, and everybody was together. For those of you who just came in, we're in Ezra chapter 3, just so you all know where we are. Okay, and rebuilding the altar of God. Okay, let's see, verse 2. They wanted to sacrifice burnt offerings on it as instructed by the law of Moses, the man of God. Based on that sentence, what do we think of Moses? Based on what I just read, thumbs up, thumbs down. Thumbs up. We like Moses, okay? That's one thing that never changed. One thing pretty much across the board, everybody thinks Moses is a great guy. Now, Moses to these guys at this time would be like George Washington to us. So if I went around the room and said, hey, what do you guys think of George Washington? I think most of us think he's a pretty good guy, but none of us have ever met him. It's not like, you remember that great speech he gave that we all went to? No, I'm not 300 years old. I didn't do that. So kind of the same thing here. This would have been somebody that would have been way outside of the generation of the people alive at this time, but it would have been somebody they thought highly of. That would be Moses to them. Okay. Verse 3. Even though the people were afraid of the local residents, they rebuilt the altar at its old site. You want to talk about a sentence that is stock full of meaning? We learn a lot in this verse. So somebody tell me, what's something that we learn? In those details, I'll read it again. Tell me what we learned. Even though the people were afraid of the local residents, they rebuilt the altar at the old site. Speak up, Doctor. I can't hear you.
I can't speak.
That's all right.
The local residents were unhappy to say the least.
Okay, unhappy to say the least, and that's what we call understatement.
Yeah.
They hated them.
Sarcasm.
Yes, a little sarcasm mixed in. Yeah, and what they're going to do, and that's the first thing we learn, is the people who were already there, and we've talked about them the last couple weeks, aren't real thrilled with this project, and aren't real thrilled with it going forward. So as soon as we start doing stuff, everybody's like, well, I'm not happy. Okay, that's the first thing we learned. Very good. What's the second thing we learned? Okay, they did it anyways. We certainly learned that. We're going to find that out that more as we go along. So we don't care that they were unhappy. Very good. What else do we learn? Two more things I see in here. I'll give you a hint. Where was the altar? It wasn't. They put it there, but it was gone. So all the time these people had been there, and they're going to claim to be like, man, we love the way things used to be, and we want to go back to that. They never rebuilt the altar. Okay? Because they wouldn't have had to rebuild it had it been rebuilt. Does that make sense? Just like I don't have to get out a chair because there's a chair. It's already here. Same thing as here. They don't have to rebuild the altar if the altar's there. So clearly the altar had never been rebuilt. The last thing we learn is, though, and this is going to become significant later, is we may not have rebuilt it, but we know where it belonged. Okay? We know where it was. So there was a designated location, however that location was designated. I mean, we can historically talk about that. But whatever it was, the altar was not there, but we knew where it was supposed to be. The implication is here, so did everyone else, including all these people who never bothered to rebuild it. They also knew where it was supposed to be, and they never did it either. This is kind of a theological one of these at them. You guys all knew where it was supposed to be, but you never put it there. It's kind of an indictment, okay? All right, let's see. Rebuilt the altar at the old site. Then they began to sacrifice burnt offerings on the altar to the Lord each morning and evening. Essentially, they started up the sacrificial practices, which means the temple is open again. That's essentially what that means. Verse 4. They celebrated the Festival of Shelters as prescribed by the law. I'll tell you what we know what that is. The Festival of the Shelters was a celebration of the 40 years that Moses and the guys were wandering around in the wilderness. They were lost. So it's a remembrance that, hey, y'all remember when we used to not have houses? Or even if you're young enough that you don't remember that time, we're going to find out. And basically, it's kind of I don't know if it's 7 days. I'm not sure how long it lasts. But we all leave our house and we go camping. That's essentially what this festival is. To remind us of the time that we didn't have homes. Now, this was established again back in the time of, after the time of Moses, sort of the time of Joshua, when they were celebrating going from wandering people who didn't have a place to be to having a place. And they're reminding us, and this time is to be a reminder of, here's what it was like when we had no place to live. We pitched a tent and lived out in the yard. That's Festival of the Shelters. And it's one that was prescribed, and they have essentially just reactivated that practice. Let's see. Prescribed by the law, sacrificing the number of burnt offerings specified for each of the festivals. Basically, that's just saying we did them correctly. Verse 5. They also offered the burnt offerings and the offerings required for the new moon celebrations and the annual festivals prescribed by the Lord. Again, just standard Israelite/Jewish practices that everybody was glad to see come back. It would be like, somebody help me out here. What's an example of something that we did years ago that we don't do regularly anymore? You may think of something. Of course, I'm drawing a complete blank right now. Here's one. Y'all remember about, all you youngins here won't remember this, but if you're as old as me or older, you'll remember this. How if you turned on your TV after 11 o'clock at 11 o'clock, what did you hear? You heard the national anthem, and then you heard the test pattern until 5 o'clock the next morning or whatever it was. That's to all of us today have like 24 hours stuff pumped into your brain. That sounds weird. But that's something we all understood. And you knew when the test pattern started, you might as well go to bed because nothing was going to be on. So it would be like a practice like that coming back, only far less obnoxious than that was. Okay, so basically things are coming back. Let's see. Verse 6. 15 days before the festival shelters began, the priests had begun to sacrifice burnt offerings to the Lord. This was even before they started to lay the foundation of the Lord's temple. So what they're saying there is the first festival we're going to come back with, the first big celebration of bringing back history, is we're going to bring back the Festival of Shelters. We're going to establish it weeks before, so 15 days ahead. We started the sacrifices. Everything started back up. Everything's going well. But what Ezra wants us to know, and the reason this is recorded is, temple hadn't been built yet. Okay, so there's no temple as we would think of a temple, but the practices started back up. It would be much like probably like Wayne Street did. When you guys were transitioning from the old sanctuary to the new sanctuary, you had service at the school. It wasn't exactly the same, but you're going through all the motions and doing all the stuff. It just wasn't here. So the building wasn't there, but the practices were. Does that make sense? How we could sing songs and do stuff. So what that tells us is practices and religious observations were much more important than the building itself, which is still the case to this day. All right, verse 7. The people hired stonemasons and carpenters, brought in cedar logs from the people of Tyre and Sidon, paying them with food, wine, and olive oil. So what are they doing? They're being productive. They were growing things. They were growing their own food and had their own flocks and herds and things. They had gardens and fields. They had, vineyards where they were growing grapes and making wine and all that stuff. They had olive groves and they were making olive oil. So they were being productive, and then they were taking the fruits of their labor and going out and buying the supplies that they needed for the temple, which includes the all the stuff they needed for that. The logs were brought down from the Lebanon mountains and floated along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea to Joppa, for King Cyrus had given permission for this. Very important to keep that part in mind. Did the king sign off on this? Yes. That's going to become significant in the next chapter. Verse 8, construction of the temple began in mid-spring during the second year when they arrived from Jerusalem. The workforce was made up from everyone who had returned from exile. Again, significant there. The people who were still there Not them. It's only the people who came back who were doing this. Including Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, Jeshua, son of Jehozadak, his fellow priests, and all the Levites. Levites who were 20 years old and older were put in charge of rebuilding the Lord's temple. So, again, the political leaders, the religious leaders, all working together. Verse 9, the workers at the temple were supervised by Jeshua and his sons and relatives, and Kadmiel and his sons, and all the descendants of Hodaviah. Okay. They were helped in this task by the Levites, the son of Henadad. The builders completed the foundation of the Lord's temple. The priests put on their robes and took their places to blow their trumpets. I went back and checked the new moon festivals that we read about a second ago. One of the things they would do as a part of that is blow the trumpets. So it was simply a feature of that. They blew trumpets for whatever reason. And the Levites, descendants of Asaph, clashed their cymbals to praise the Lord, just as King David had prescribed. Asaph was the chief musician in David's courts. So that name, and you see King David's name there as well, would have went back a long way. With praise and thanksgiving, they sang this song to the Lord. He is so good, his faithful love for Israel endures forever. That was incredibly musical, the way I read that, but they sang that. And I'm imagining if you read that in Hebrew, it would probably sound like a song. But when you translated it, it doesn't. But anybody want to try to do interpretive dance of that or try to sing? I figured. Yeah, not all at once, please. Then all the people gave a great shout, praising the Lord, because the foundation of the temple had been laid. Again, I'm going back to those of you who were around when they built the new sanctuary. I bet every piece of it was a celebration. When the foundation was there, when the walls were there, when the stained glass showed up. So they saw the foundations. They were very excited. But many of the older priests, Levites, and other leaders who had seen the first temple wept aloud when he saw the new temple's foundation. Okay, so the more seasoned amongst them remembered the old temple. So we're talking in one generation that temple had been destroyed. There were people alive who still remember the old one. So you can imagine it would have been very, very meaningful to them to see the old place come back. And to be a part of that, because they would recognize what that means. Now, the younger crowd amongst them would not know, would not have any idea. And I actually brought an example of this. I'll pick on Aaron because he's going to learn not to sit in the front row here pretty soon. All right, Aaron, do you know what this place here is? Recognize that place?
Old sanctuary?
Good guess. Patsy, what's this place?
The church.
That's the old sanctuary. Aaron made a very lucky guess. He got it. Yes. Because you'd never seen it before, had you? You'd never seen this place before, had you? I bought this off eBay for $2. It's a postcard that said 2-cent stamp on it of the old church. So if you guys want to see this. So Patsy says, we got to save that postcard. Aaron says, 2 cents for a postcard is pretty cheap. Because it means different things to both of you because you had seen it in different ways. And Susan, you're lucky Aaron was here because that was going to be you. So, because I knew Susan wouldn't know what it meant either. But that's how it works. Is because you feel a connection to these places. It means something to you. It's the same thing if I showed you a picture of my home church, the church I grew up in. You'd be like, it's a big brick building. I'm going to be like, no, that's my church you're talking about. Because I have a meaning there. That's the same thing as here. These people felt the same way about this. Not have the temple was a deeply regrettable thing to have to deal with. So now to see it coming back, they were very emotional. So the folks who remembered the first one were crying about it. However, and we'll continue reading there in verse 12. The others, however, were shouting with joy. So, yeah, they may not have had the emotional connection to the place, but they knew what it meant to have it back. And they were very excited, so they were shouting with joy. The joyful shouting and weeping mingled together with a loud noise could be heard for a far distance. So at the laying of the foundation, or the completion of the foundation, they made a loud sound. Now, what does loud sounds tend to do? What does a loud sound tend to do? Got people's attention. That's right. If there was a big crash down the hallway, we're going to go down there and see, what happened, right? Because that's what loud sounds do, and that's exactly what happens here. Verse 4, or Ezra chapter 4. The enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard the exiles were rebuilding a temple to the Lord, the God of Israel. All right, let's just consider that sentence for a second. So the person writing the book of Ezra, let's talk about them for a second. It was probably Ezra, again, the priest, whoever he was, looked at this. The enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard the exiles were rebuilding a temple to the Lord, the God of Israel. Is this biased? Is this sentence biased in any way? How so? What bias do you hear? Who's wrong? I'll read it to you again. In this sentence, who's wrong? The enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard the exiles were rebuilding a temple to the Lord, the God of Israel. Who's wrong? Of course. It's the people, the Lord God, we're building his temple and they're not happy about it. How dare they? So clearly, we're seeing an example of history as written by the people who win. So they approached Zerubbabel and the other leaders. Okay, so notice who they went to. They didn't go to the guy's name I didn't pronounce right that was the priest. They went to Zerubbabel, who was the political leader. They weren't going to try it with the priest. They decided to go fight with the governor, or the king in this case. Zerubbabel and the others said, now this was the first thing they said. Let us build with you, for we worship your God just as you do. We have sacrificed to him ever since King Esarhaddon of Assyria brought us here. Now, who is this king, whose name we haven't seen yet? The Assyrians were the ones who destroyed everything the first time. They were the ones who drug everybody off into exile in the first place prior to the Babylonians coming in and wiping them out. So this was the people who caused the problem. And Esarhaddon was the last king of that place. So he was the last king before the Babylonians wiped them out. But do you notice, and we're going to see this a little more as we read on, they kind of like this guy. But it says we have been sacrificing to him, meaning the Lord, ever since that time. Why is that a suspect phrase? Why would that phrase, based on what we read in the previous chapter, why would that phrase be suspect? That they have sacrificed ever since the king of Assyria dragged him off. The altar never came back. Okay? The place where that was supposed to happen, and we knew where it was supposed to happen, we never built it back, and now you're claiming to have been sacrificing this whole time. How exactly have you been doing that? That would have been a problem. And so they made this claim, and then verse 3. But Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and the other leaders of Israel replied, you may have no part in this work. We alone will build a temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, just as King Cyrus of Persia commanded us. Let's speculate a little bit. What grounds are they? They're claiming something pretty big here. They're like, thanks, but no thanks. What grounds are they doing that on? Are they turning down help for this massive project? I'm asking you to speculate. Why would they say no? Obviously, King Cyrus really doesn't even know anything about these people. But why would they say no? They got a big project. They could probably use the help. We're going to find out when we get over to Nehemiah, they could really, really use the help. But they're turning it down. Why don't they want these people to help?
Did they not trust him?
Well, obviously not, because they called him in a lie right off the bat. Okay? And I imagine their attitude was, you guys have had 70 years to do this. And it ain't getting done till we got here. Thanks, but no thanks. You had your chance, had plenty of opportunity, and you didn't do it. So there probably is the window in your opportunity has closed. And immediately, as often is the case, whenever you confront somebody with evil intention and you call them out on it, they immediately show you you're right. Verse 4. Then the local residents tried to discourage and frighten the people of Judah to keep them from their work. How bad did they want it rebuilt? Obviously not that bad. Because not only did they not do it for 70 years, now they're trying to stop somebody else from doing it. So, a lot of suspect there. So what did they do? Try to stop them. Verse 5. They bribed agents to work against them and frustrate their plans. I don't know what that means. I could see that being very frustrating, though. This went on during the entire reign of King Cyrus of Persia and lasted until King Darius of Persia took the throne. All right, let's do a little history here. Where have we heard of King Cyrus before? guys remember? We've actually talked about this guy. Yeah, he and Nehemiah are buddies, okay? And so Cyrus is going to come later. And Nehemiah, he was the one that started the return and sent the people back. So you got Cyrus, who is kind of okayed this project. Now, we're going to go more advanced now. King Darius. King Darius is known, actually you know King Darius. At least you know something he did. You just may not realize that was his name. Bonus level. What book of the Bible does King Darius show up in? Hint, it's not Ezra nor is it Nehemiah. He shows up someplace else. Close. One of them is going to be Esther, but it's not this one. But Esther is going to come up. I'll give you a hint. Underneath his throne room, he had a pit of lions. Daniel. Okay? He threw Daniel in the lion's den. So Daniel in the lion's den, that was King Darius. All right, so we know him from there. Then years later, King Xerxes, that one is from Esther, Jack. He was the one that, he was so smart that when his wife wouldn't do what he told her to do, he banned her from seeing him ever again. I'm sure she was just totally crushed by that. Years later, when King Xerxes began his reign, the enemies of Judah wrote a letter of accusation against the people of Judah and Jerusalem. Okay? So we're going to talk about that in a second. Verse 7, even later, during the reign of King Artaxerxes of Persia, and Artaxerxes is one of the guys who dealt with Nehemiah. The enemies of Judah, led by Bishlam, Mithridath, and Tabeal, sent a letter to Artaxerxes in the Aramaic language, and it was translated for the king. And, okay, let's stop there for a second. The note I wrote on this portion right here is they wrote a letter to the king making all kind of accusations. This is the 6th century BC version of they wrote a mean Facebook post. They tweeted something or they did an Instagram video or something saying, man, these guys are awful. We need to go kill them or something. So just to prove that problem's been around a long time. Being anonymous by writing letters or being on social media makes people incredibly brave to say all kind of stuff, but I don't need to explain any of that. Okay, so let's talk about this letter. Verse 8. Rehum the governor and Shimshai, the court secretary, wrote the letter, telling King Artaxerxes about the situation in Jerusalem. They greeted the king for all their colleagues, okay? First rule of making an anonymous threat against somebody. You got to name, you do one of two things. You either name nobody, making it anonymous, or you name everybody. Meaning this letter is literally from everybody, including people from foreign countries you never heard of. They all hate your guts, and they want you to... Have you ever received one of these letters? Come on, any of you who've worked in the public, you've gotten them before. I get them on kind of every other month or so. I usually get one of these. And telling me I'm the Antichrist or something like that, which I've gotten used to that so far. But I appreciate the ones that are signed, but I will say that the ones that are not signed, in case any of you ever want to write me one, my rule is if it's not important enough for you to sign it, it's not important enough for me to read it. So just so you know. So they write this letter. They're going to name a whole bunch of people. So let's go through and see who they name. Verse 9. They greeted the king for all their colleagues. So here are the people. The judges, the local leaders. I mean, they're just big groups of people. The people of Tarpel, which I'm assuming is a town around there somewhere. The Persians, who, why would they? Then the people of Erech and Susa. We'll talk about Susa in a second. And that is Elam. Okay, we'll stop there. Susa is a location. And that location, whatever happens there, also shows up in the book of Esther. She talks about the fortress of Susa in some of her writings. Look at all these people. So we got judges, local leaders, the people of Tarpel, the Persians, the Babylonians, the people of Erech and Susa, and Elam, whatever that is. So all these people want to let them know. They also sent greetings from the rest of the people, whom the great and noble Ashurbanipal, I think I actually got that one right. Ashurbanipal had deported and relocated to Samaria and throughout the neighboring lands of the province of the Euphrates River. All right, who is Ashurbanipal? Ashurbanipal was a king. He was the last strong king. There were a few kings after him, but they were kind of not as strong as he was. He was the last actual king of the place called the empire of Assyria. Now, Assyria is important to know because they're the ones who did all the destroying. The Assyrians are the ones who carried the people off into exile, and took over the country and burned down the temple and tore down the walls. It was the Assyrian people that did this. Ashurbanipal was the last actual king that nation had. Again, they had a few others after him, but he was like the last strong one. So he's the one that caused all this destruction that we're dealing with. So let's check again. How was he described? Verse 10, they also sent greetings to the rest of the people whom the great and noble Ashurbanipal had deported and relocated to Samaria and throughout the neighboring lands of the province west of the Euphrates River. Ashurbanipal, thumbs up or thumbs down according to this letter? Letter likes him. I mean, if you're going to call anybody great and noble, I mean, you don't say that about somebody you don't like. But this is the guy who caused all the problems. Why would they say that? Why would they say, we think Ashurbanipal, man, he's awesome. Why would they say that? Why would they say that in this letter? What do you think? Let's speculate. What do you think they're trying to do here? Hold that thought. We're going to get to the answer. The other thing I want to notice here is you notice where they were relocated. What was that place called? Starts with an S. Samaria. You ever heard Jesus tell the parable of the Good Samaritan? That's these guys. These guys created what are known as the Samaritans today. Everybody hates the Samaritans. That's why Jesus told the parable about the Good Samaritan. Because in the story, the guy's in the ditch and he's hurt, and the priest goes by, and the temple guy goes by. And according to Jesus, when he's telling the parable, the Samaritan stops. The original hearers of that language were like, man, that guy's life just got even worse. That's what they think is going to happen. And then the Samaritan ends up being the hero, and I'll tell you, most of the people in the first century would be like, yeah, this is a load of crap. No way that happens. And that's how much they hated the Samaritans, which is why Jesus told the parable, was to make a point. But they created them. The Samaritans were the ones who were left in the land when everyone else was drug off. And when they came back, as you can tell, they didn't get along, which sets up a lot of the conflict we read in the New Testament between these two groups of people. So, little history on it there. Okay. All right. So this is a copy of their letter, and I want you to keep that Ashurbanipal, great and noble Ashurbanipal. I want you to keep that line in mind because you're going to see it's going to shape how this letter is written. Okay, to King Artaxerxes, from your loyal subjects in the province west of the Euphrates River. Okay, how is the king supposed to feel about these people? Thumbs up or thumbs down? They want the king to like them. We're your loyal subjects. We're only worried about you. You're the bestest king ever, and blah, blah, blah. And verse 12, and I want you to hear this as one of your children telling on one of their siblings as I read this, okay? The king should know that the Jews who have come here to Jerusalem from Babylon and are rebuilding this rebellious and evil city. Is there any way to read that sentence I just read and not hear it as somebody tattletelling? Right? I mean, do you see that? Am I making this up? The king should know the Jews who came here from Jerusalem from Babylon are rebuilding this rebellious and evil city. So first of all, they're assuming the king doesn't know this is happening. Second of all, they're thinking that the king would not be happy that it's happening. That's what they're assuming. But if you remember, Ezra has already talked to the king. The king has given blessing for this. They have laid the foundation and will soon finish its walls. The king should know that if the city is rebuilt and its walls are completed, it will be much to your disadvantage. For the Jews will then refuse to pay their tributes, customs, and tolls to you. We are your loyal subjects and do not want to see the king dishonored in this way. We have sent the king this information. And then they're going to ask for something here in a second, so let's stop there. Do you notice how they're talking about this group of people that came in? Okay, remember, these are the people who stayed in. They have had some conflict. The people who came back and the people who were already there obviously don't like each other all that much. But do you hear the language of how the language has changed from earlier in the same chapter? Originally, when the survivors came in to say, hey, you guys are rebuilding the temple, we would like to help. We all worship the same God, and we sacrifice the same way, and we do this the same, and we're brothers, and blah, blah, blah. That's not how this letter's written, though. Do you notice that? Do you notice the change? We are your loyal subject, and they are the problem. Again, it's always great when somebody with evil intention comes at you, you call them out on it, and they immediately make you right. Because that's exactly what happened here. Okay? So they're tattletaling to the king, and unfortunately, you're going to find out, at least for a while, it works. But the one thing they're really trying to paint is, we are loyal to you, Artaxerxes. You are the one that we want to be faithful to, and we just want this rebuilding to stop, and so on and so forth. Do you understand how them writing something like this might lead to a falling out of a relationship later? Do you see now why the Jews and the Samaritans don't like each other? It's stuff like this. Because the people who were left in the land are now selling them out, selling these people who are coming in to do this work, selling them out by trying to make them see that, they don't belong here. We want them gone. Okay, verse 14. It says, we are your loyal subjects and do not want to see the king dishonored in this way. We have sent the king this information. We suggest that a search be made of the ancestors' records, where you will discover what a rebellious city this has been in the past. In fact, it was destroyed because of its long and troublesome history of revolt against kings and countries who controlled it. Now, remember, we're approximately 600 years before the time of Jesus in this particular story. And one of the things that comes through loud and clear, though I'm assuming very unintentionally by the gospel writers, is one of the most tragic characters in all of the gospel, if you ask me, besides, you could make an argument for Judas, but the other guy you really got to feel sorry for is Pontius Pilate. Now, if you remember who Pontius Pilate is, he was the Roman official who was charged with taking care of Jerusalem. And by take care of, I mean, we don't want no trouble, okay? Keep it settled. Now, this is 600 years later. And Pontius Pilate, if you'll notice, throughout the entire trial of Jesus, he's basically the whole time saying, guys, I don't care. I don't care. All I want is for you guys to settle. That's it. I just want you to settle down. If you don't settle down, Rome's going to get mad and something worse is going to happen. So I don't care if you're mad about this teacher named Jesus. I don't care about that. I just want you guys to settle down. Because remember who the fight was against. It was the religious leaders who were causing a problem. And then you had Jesus' supporters on the other hand. And he basically said, y'all got to quit fighting. Because not only am I going to lose my post, a lot of y'all are going to lose your head in this. And we got to get this settled down. And that's why Pilate finally, if you'll notice in one of those great scenes, when they're talking about the truth, Pilate says, remember the famous question Pilate asked? Anybody remember what it was? What is truth? What is it even? What is it? You can tell the guy's exasperated. All I'm supposed to do is keep you guys calm down, and you won't calm down for nothing. So if you'll notice, he finally gives up Jesus to crucifixion to try to calm down the crowd, which failed miserably, but that's what he was trying to do. And because Pilate understood the exact same thing that these people understand. We all are here today. We've never been conquered by a foreign power, thanks be to God. So we don't know what that's like. But in that time, that's what these people were tasked to do. And I'm assuming that when this letter got sent, they dropped the guy's name. Rehum, I think was his name. He's the governor. His job was keep it under control. Okay? I don't want to hear nothing out of them. I don't want any trouble. I don't want any fighting. I don't want them making weapons of war. I want them farming and raising their families, taking care of things. But I don't want any problems. So when the king receives this letter, I'm sure the first thing was the governor went out and probably punched somebody in the nose. What were you thinking when you sent this thing? Because now the king's going to be all upset, and as we're going to find out, we're going to lead to all kinds of problems. But the whole time, though, when they go to this thing, they're going to find out that arguing and fighting was definitely a feature of this area. Something everybody had really strong feelings about. So it's all trying to keep this area calm, and it just is not going to work. Okay, verse 15. We suggest a search be made of your ancestors' records, which means go back to the memoirs of the previous kings and read what they had to deal with, where you will discover what a rebellious city this has been in the past. In fact, it was destroyed because of the long and troublesome history of revolt against kings and countries who controlled it. We declare to the king that if a city is rebuilt and its walls completed, the province west of the Euphrates River will be lost to you. Okay? And the king goes, I'm sorry, what? You're going to hurt my bottom line? That's going to be a problem. So, verse 17. Then King Artaxerxes sent this reply. Okay? And the governor already hates his life and is about to hate his life a bunch more. Because the letter comes from this random group of people, the Bishlam and Mithridath and Tabiel, comes from them, but the response is sent to the governor. Put this down. Okay, make this go away. Verse 17, then King Artaxerxes sent this reply. To Rehum, the governor, Shimshai, the court secretary, and their colleagues living in Samaria and throughout the province west of the Euphrates River. Greetings. The letter you sent has been translated and read to me, to which Rehum is like, I'm sorry, the letter? I ordered a search of the records and found that Jerusalem has indeed been a hotbed of insurrection against many kings. In fact, rebellion and revolt are normal there. Sorry to say this, fact check true. Verse 20, powerful kings have ruled over Jerusalem and the entire province west of the Euphrates River, receiving tribute, customs, and tolls. So, the accusation is true, which is why they didn't want to send. Therefore, issue orders that these men stop their work. The city must not be rebuilt except by my express command. Be diligent, don't neglect this matter, for we must not permit the situation to harm the king's interest. When this letter from King Artaxerxes was read to Rehum, Shimshai, and their colleagues, they hurried to Jerusalem. Then with a show of strength, they forced the Jews to stop building. How do you think that went over? Like a lead pigeon? Is that what I heard? That's exactly how it went over, okay? The Jews are now mad because they know what's happened here. Because King Artaxerxes and the other kings had blessed this project up till now, and now suddenly the king is sending word to stop? Gosh, I wonder who did that. I wonder who stirred this up. And so the controversy that was kind of brewing is now going to break out into open rebellion, and everybody is going to be angry. And it wasn't enough for Rehum to say, basically send a text message to Ezra and say, hey, guys, knock it off. It wasn't enough. It says they went up there with a show of strength, which means, who do you think he showed up with? Soldiers. Okay? Nothing makes people feel good inside than a bunch of soldiers who were there pointing spears at them. So they forced the Jews to stop building. Verse 24. So the work on the temple of God in Jerusalem had stopped, and it remained at a standstill the second year of the reign of King Darius of Persia. King Darius, again, being Daniel in the lion's den fame. So the first round of conflict that they have with the people who still live there, the W goes to them. Okay, because they managed to at least delay this project for 2 years, it says, which is a pretty significant thing. And remember, for this project, which is going to be different than the one Nehemiah is going to be undertaking, this project was entirely funded by the people who came back. Because they told us they were making olive oil and they were having food and wine and stuff, and they were selling that and using that to buy supplies. They were funding their own work. Later, when Nehemiah goes back, the king he's coming from, is actually going to be funding the work and making that. And we'll talk about that a little more when we get over to Nehemiah. But they know. So again, you can imagine this does not make for friendly neighbors. I mean, if any of you have ever had neighbors who call the police on you all the time, I'm assuming that doesn't make for friendly relations, all right? And that's exactly what's happened here as they stirred up this trouble. And again, keep this in mind because this helps us understand a lot of the things that happen in the New Testament. Because these fights, I'm going to be honest with you, some of these fights are still going on today. Some of these conflicts are still happening today, but they certainly were certainly ramped up during the times of this time and then the time of the New Testament. So don't know that I want to get into the next chapter. Any of you have any questions? I let you guys get away with being way too quiet while we're in here because I get to going and fire it up. Now I'm even all sweaty. Ugh. So, all right, this feedback time. Are you guys getting anything out of this? Are you guys feeling it? It's interesting. I hope you are. It's a history, and I know that's sometimes kind of dry, but I feel like it's good to learn because, again, understanding this then helps you understand things that happen later, and I think that's important for comprehension of some of the stories, particularly. I mean, you don't realize what was going on in the parable of the Good Samaritan unless you understand this fight that happened 600 years prior. And one of the things about this area of the world is they have an incredibly long memory, especially for things that go wrong. And a lot of these fights last a long, long time. So one of the things that we're going to see, I'll give you a sneak preview of next week for our last 2 minutes here, is one of the things you're going to see is when the project picks back up, because we'll continue with Ezra next week, a couple chapters of Ezra. When the work picks back up, what you're going to find is Ezra's going to be a little more careful going forward. This time, he took a handshake from the king and thought that was enough. Next time, he's going to come with documentation that says this is supposed to happen and it's been blessed to happen. And when you guys start with your, hey, the king don't know about this, I'll be like, I'm sorry, whose signature is this right here? I mean, that's what he's going to say. So, and that's not going to solve the problem. It just makes him have to go find another one to complain about, which they do. But that's what they want. And the one cool thing about the stories of both Ezra and Nehemiah is the one thing that saw them through this conflict and all the people who hated them and wanted to smash them and bash them and all this stuff. The one thing that got them through is they knew what they were doing. They were building a connection to their past, to their history. They wanted a chance to raise their kids in what they would have considered to be church. They wanted to help them understand their ancestors, help them all to grow up so that there would be future generations that would know these things. I mean, these stories have been preserved even for us today because somebody cared enough to preserve them. And that's what they were doing with the temple, is they knew with the temple laying in rocks all over the ground and smashed up and stuff, nobody's learning anything from that. Nobody's being preserved by that. And that's why they took this so seriously, to be able to take this work so seriously and work so hard on it. It's because they were building something they wanted to keep, which is something that our world today could learn something from. We don't like building things we're going to keep. We don't like building anything anymore. And I'm not talking about us here in this room. I mean us as a culture. We tear down things that we try to build, and we don't allow history to survive. And that's something we're going to live to regret. And these people already regretted it because they had their history taken from them. And they made no bones about the fact they wanted to get it back. So, good thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, they may have, I mean, I'm not saying they didn't do any of them, but the one thing we know for sure is they weren't doing the sacrifices properly because the temple or the altar was gone. So whether they observed the festival of shelters and the new moon festival, they may very well have. I don't know about that. But any claim they were doing the sacrifices, they know for sure they weren't because the altar was gone. So, yeah, good question. No. We're doing kind of a step back in time. The wall in Nehemiah is not going to get built for about 50 or 60 years till after that, because what they did is they established the temple first, and then they built the wall around the town. So they established the temple first, then they established the town. I don't know that was by design, but that's how it happened. Yeah, well, they were warning about if the wall comes back, because the temple is a worship thing, the wall is a defense thing. And a wall meant we were fortified and could fight. You know, a temple, I mean, if we were going to fight a war, this would be a terrible building to have because they're going to shoot us in through the windows. Temples are the same thing, where if you build a wall with no gaps in it, you can defend that. And that's what they were warning against. They were saying, don't let them do that, because if they get this wall, then they're not going to do nothing. And they're not going to give you any money or pay you any tribute, because they're going to say, come and get it and see what happens. And which, truth be told, that's exactly what they would do if they had a wall, and that's eventually what they did do. So. All right, I'm going to give. You're going to have about 4 minutes until Don's going to be ready for us upstairs. So if you want to chat amongst yourself for a few moments, or ask any questions or whatever, introduce yourself to somebody. All right, I hope you guys were able to hear that. I want to thank this guy right here. Thank you, Aaron Powell, for allowing this to happen. Where you at, Aaron? Where'd you go? Oh, there he is. Yeah, that's the guy. He's my tech guy now. So thanks, everybody, and have a good night.